things are salient in Muslim cultures. We need to get rid of those things as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, they will veil the beauty of the Sunnah and ultimately the beauty of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the people in Europe who are in a spiritual desert and are really looking for a practical alternative. We're going to be kicked out, I think, at 12, and I did say that I'd offer a bit of time for questions, inshaAllah. Sorry to have spoken at such length, but I think this is an important issue because for the community to survive, we have to get away from the defensive lager mentality and get into a more da'wah-oriented mode, to be more proud of ourselves, to see ourselves as incredibly fortunate heirs and custodians of the last great sacred tradition on earth, and not to be anxious about the way in which some aspects of what we've inherited clashes with the secular principles of modernity, but to try and talk people through their issues and to show the Muslims as a healing to modern Europe and to the modern world, rather than as some kind of problem of integration, which is how the debate is currently framed. You've already got a question? Yeah.
What will be advice to the young people in France against the hijab and niqab? It's a practical thing. And those little girls who want to go to school, university, how can they complete their education?
Well, because of the Amsterdam Treaty, it's possible for any French citizen to come to England and to study in England. They'll have to learn English, obviously, but they can even go over the border into Belgium and other places, parts of Italy where there are French-speaking campuses in northern Italy. So they can travel, and some of them do travel. The alternative might be to say, well, the hijab is not clearly in the Quran, and maybe we need to make concessions. But I think that's a very dangerous approach to take. There are more sort of minoritarian practices like the niqab, where there might be a valid argument of that kind amongst the ulama, but the hijab is something that clearly is part of normative Islamic practice, and we don't have the right to interfere with Allah's legislation. If we have to be persecuted, marginalized, that may just be the fate of the believer in a secular continent, and that will generate a lot of sympathy for us and will presumably increase our sense of confidence and conversion rates. Very often, persecution is very good for religious minorities. The reason why the Jews survived in Europe against all the odds for 1,000 years is partly because they were pushed away and marginalized and spat upon. And in a sense, I think you see across Europe a great revival of interest in Islam amongst young people, precisely because of Islam being so maligned and maltreated. So these things might seem to be problematic, but they have positive dimensions as well, inshaAllah. Yeah.
Would you regard the Salafi movement as reactionary to modernity or progressive?
Well, the Salafi movement is not a single thing.
Yeah.
It is very diverse. There are some Salafis who, when you talk to them, could very happily be classified according to the strictest definitions of classical Sunnism as Hanbalis, and that can't possibly be a problem. There might be issues about how they define the eternity of the Quranic text and certain other things, what kind of hadith they use that many scholars won't accept, but that's fine, that's part of the legitimate ikhtilaf. The problem is not with the Salafi principle as such, the problem is with a certain type of takfiri or exclusionary, angry Salafism, a language that justifies considering oneself to be the only true Muslim, that can very often be a religious justification for personal insecurity and egotism. And when the ego is combined with religion, then you have a very dangerous phenomenon. So we need to be very careful, but it's that particular type of the Salafi movement that we have problems with. And much of it is essentially somewhere within the already fairly vaguely defined boundaries of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Yeah, brother.
In reference to your statement of human anxieties to cutting edge technology, I would just particularly like to know your views on genetics research and especially stem cell research.
My understanding is that stem cell research is permissible because of the widespread view amongst the classical ulama that an early term aborted fetus doesn't have a ruh and hence is, as they say, just like a date stone. It's not the palm tree. The stem cell research, on my understanding, and I'm not a mufti, is accepted by most of the ulama. The real problem is to genetically foreordain the future of your children, and that's where things now seem to be moving. Even 10 years ago, all of the ethicists were against that, but increasingly in Oxford now it seems a majority of the philosophers think that it's ethically legitimate for us to have the ability to reshape future generations. And that's really where the worry lies. So we're on the brink of having to face those fatwas. We're not quite there yet. One of the sisters, yeah.
Just on how you would recommend approaching in a public forum the areas which are apparently or seemingly irreconcilable between sort of the Islamic outlook and what you call a modern outlook, and areas such as capital punishment or stoning and that such. And also the idea that, you know, obviously we believe that Islam is a religion that came for all people in all kinds of all places, and why it is that at this current time so few people would, you know, we find ourselves at odds with the majority on issues like these. If they are so apparently just, why are so few people willing or able to see them as such? And yeah, I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah, I think there's two issues there. Firstly, it's that the Sharia has been thoroughly veiled from just about everybody in the modern world by the fact that it's applied so often in such an abusive way. You look at the procedures in these trials in Nigeria, for instance, and it's really hair-raising when you consider how a Sharia court should be operating and in what kind of framework and what rules for witnesses there are and how many differences of opinions there are. They just don't follow the rules. The Hudud ordinances in Pakistan were a similar kind of appalling hybrid between poorly understood relics of what they call Anglo-Mohammedan law, aspects of common law, bits of the Sharia as interpreted by people who'd studied for a while in Saudi Arabia, and the result was a kind of legal monster. People see that, that's all they see, and of course they're repelled by it. So part of the problem is our problem. Part of the problem also is the modern world's inherent perversity that in the US, for instance, or in this country, people think that in this country, in the European tradition, the US has a different view of capital punishment. It's always assumed that corporal punishment is crueler than what you might call spiritual punishment. That it's fine to send somebody to strange ways for 5 years to be locked up with a bunch of rapists and criminals and to emerge profoundly transformed by those people. That's all right, even a young person. But any kind of corporal punishment is absolutely outrageous. And that's a materialistic definition of what a punishment should be. If you hurt somebody physically, that must be more barbarous than to hurt them spiritually. And we would just disagree with that. Particularly since the way in which prison affects and punishes people differs gigantically from person to person. A very vulnerable young person who's been sent to prison for 5 years may well never recover from the experience. Somebody who's kind of really tough and was a bully at school may kind of enjoy it. So there's something inherently unjust about preferring spiritual to corporal punishments. Having said that, I'm not a supporter of the uncritical reapplication of the Hudud legislation in modern conditions, because I can't see anywhere where the preconditions for that as set forth in the classical texts exist. You have to defend them, but by pointing out that they are interpreted in many different ways, and many of the ulama, most of those I've studied with, do not defend their application in a modern jurisdiction because there's certain technical rules that simply can't be satisfied. So, but what's very important is that people's interest in Islam is not short-circuited by certain spectacular issues. What's really important is what you believe, how you pray, the ritual core of the religion. That's what really matters, and those were the first things that Revelation came to institute. We mustn't allow outward things to veil inward things, and each of us has to develop a particular kind of way of stopping people from being distracted by the external. Unfortunately, because so many Muslims are preoccupied with external things and spend more time talking about hijab than they talk about taqwa, we're part of the problem, unfortunately, because we've got our priorities wrong. One more question. Yes, it's ready.
Thank you very much for the interesting lecture. The question is, how do you value the new forms of performing arts by Muslims, such as Muslim comedy, Islam?
I think it's hard to generalise, and I don't know much about it. I don't really, being a kind of older person, I don't move in those circles. I think